Okay, it's 2:45, and it's my pleasure to welcome everybody, speakers and participants here to our session D425, Adaptation of Education to Pandemic and Other Challenges. I like that the pandemic is the challenge, and then there are some others that we also deal with. Very excited to be here. My name is Josef Oehmen. I'm a professor at the Technical University of Denmark. I think we always like to think very highly of the research that we do, but I think at the end of the day, if we're honest with ourselves, the biggest impact that we have in our careers is through the education that we provide, because that just has a significant impact on a large number of people. So I'm always very pleased when we talk about design education in a serious way, and figure out how we can get better at that. I'm also very excited about this because I think that the pandemic afforded us. It was a horrible thing that happened, but it afforded us a natural experiment and maybe some opportunities to experiment with teaching and learning that we would not have otherwise had. So I'm really looking forward to see how you have formalized that in your papers now moving forward with the presentation and the discussion. Jelena, would you be so kind to share the slide with us with the program now? And I'll briefly introduce the speakers. Perfect. So we're going to start the session with Vivek's talk on project-based learning in disaster response, designing solutions with sociotechnical complexity. So I'm really looking forward to that. Vivek is a postdoc in mechanical engineering at the University of California, and has done lots of other interesting things, among them also being a designer and strategist at IDEO. So very cool combination here of practice and theory. We then have Yasuyuki, our second speaker for today, joining us from Politecnico di Milano. Yasuyuki is a PhD candidate there and will speak on an educational probe for developing online education, a case of online problem-based learning in design education in India. Again, I think really, really interesting, and I already had a sneak peek at the papers and the presentation, so you're all in for a treat here. Then we have the third paper presented today by Frederike Kossack. Frederike is a PhD student at the Ruhr-University in Bochum, and Frederike is going to talk to us about adaptive e-learning for the engineering design education at the Ruhr-University in Bochum. Then as our fourth speaker, we have Urvi, and I'm especially excited about Urvi being part of our session because first conference presentation, so big milestone here, Urvi. Congratulations again. And the topic that Urvi will be speaking on is overcoming pedagogical challenges in product design education during the pandemic. And Urvi is joining us from the Atlas Skilltech University in India. And then last but not least, we have Sasha speaking to us about creating a multidisciplinary collaboration service and learning experience in design education. And Sasha is the Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion and Associate Professor of Marketing at the Eberhard School of Business at the University of the Pacific. And I can't help myself but associate palm trees and sunshine with reading the University of the Pacific. So one reason among many to also look forward to Sasha's presentation here, and Sasha is joined here also on the panel by her colleague Mary Lee, who also worked on the paper. So I believe that by now you are most likely familiar with the format of our sessions here. So in a minute I'll ask Jelena to play the pre-recorded presentations for us, and after that we will have our discussion. You're very welcome to ask your questions in the chat. We will collect questions until the end of the presentation session. And then we'll have a bit of a panel discussion here with all of our presenters. So you're very welcome to ask specific questions to specific presenters. I will then take the liberty of also asking those questions to some of the other presenters, and also invite comments from other presenters today. The idea being that we're not turning this into a holy inquisition and grilling of the presenters, but that we have a good discussion and interaction here going between us here in the audience and the presenters that have prepared the papers. All right. And with that, Jelena, I'd kindly ask you to start Vivek's presentation. I invite all the presenters here to keep sharing the videos, and I will also mute myself now. And then, we'll now looking forward, Vivek, to your presentation on project-based learning in disaster response. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vivek Rao, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of California at Berkeley. And today I'm delighted to share some of our work on project-based learning in disaster response, designing solutions with socio-technical complexity. This work was done in collaboration with my co-authors, Rachel Dzombak, Deniz Dogruer, and Alice Agogino. So let me begin with our motivation for this research. Design and innovation pedagogy is increasingly a focus of training students to solve complex problems, and is supported by a wide range of models and frameworks, two examples of which you can see on the slide here. On the left is Kara Wrigley's Design Innovation Catalyst framework, splitting the design process into 3 discrete phases. And on the right, we see Michael Berry and Sarah Beckman's Innovation as a Learning Process model, which separates the innovation process into 4 separate innovation capabilities that are informed by experiential learning. And we'll be coming back to Beckman and Berry's framework later in this conversation. Now, project-based learning is a well-known framework for teaching design and innovation, and specifically project-based service learning, or PBSL, is defined as students working on a project benefiting a real community or client, and has been shown to uniquely engage students. And that engagement is primarily for 3 reasons, as shown in the literature. First, improved retention. Second, superior technical and professional skill acquisition. And last, higher skill acquisition among female students. Now, PBSL still is not perfect, and best practices to operate and PBSL enabled by design and innovation education are still emerging. And so some challenges include balancing knowledge acquisition and implementation, sustainment and scale up to larger classes, and positive impact to a partner organization. And so that sets us up for our research questions in this study, which is that broadly we seek to contribute emergent best practices in design-based PBSL focused on socio-technical challenges. And this work lies at the intersection of 3 broad topics. The first is design and innovation education. The second is project-based service learning. And the third is socio-technical systems, specifically disaster response is examined in this work. And so our research questions are how do students perceive project-based service learning through an emphasis on, first, socio-technical systems, and second, technology taught as a creative tool. And so let me talk through the methods as we examined a course on innovation and disaster response. So we studied a project-based course focused on disaster response, recovery, and resilience over 2 separate offerings over 2 different years. And we choose disaster response as a representative study of socio-technical systems because it demonstrates many characteristics of socio-technical systems. As you can see in this figure, I'll only focus on the 3 that are highlighted in green because disaster response represents multiple stakeholders. It also is often exacerbated by institutional, environmental, and social conditions. And as Comfort wrote, it really is a complex and adaptive system, which is a hallmark of socio-technical systems. Furthermore, disaster response, recovery, and resilience represents an urgent challenge that spans social and existential needs, and correspondingly is a focus of a variety of service organizations. Here on this graph is from the United Nations, showing an increase in the number of deaths related to natural disasters over the past 2 decades. So in the class, teams of students chose a pre-scoped independent project in 2020 or worked with an external US government client in 2021 on a challenge related to disaster response. And so you can see some demographic statistics of the class on the right in this table. One thing I want to highlight is the types of projects students were working on. In year 1, an example project was a team worked on sustainable rebuilding. And in year 2, a team was working on synchronizing data during disaster response. So very relevant projects in this domain. The course followed the innovation as a learning process methodology from Sarah Beckman and Michael Berry that we covered earlier, and it's grounded in human-centered design, systems thinking, and technology toolkits. And you can see some examples of prototypes developed by teams throughout the design process on the right. At the top is a heads-up display to help first responders navigate in low visibility conditions with the assistance of a drone. And at the bottom is an evacuation map planning tool to help those fleeing from a wildfire event understand where it is safe to go. And so in our methodology, we reviewed the end of course reflections from 52 students over 2 years. And a thematic analysis was conducted to ascertain how socio-technical fluency and technology manifested in student experience. And you can see some of the queries that guided our analysis of these, the prompts for the reflection are shown at the table on the right. And so let's talk through our results. So one theme that emerged was that students found value in contextualizing the role of technology in a broader problem space. And so one student wrote that it was nice to learn about different solutions that didn't fully rely on technology and more thought about creative solutions to the same problems. And so this was really interesting to us because the finding supports broader results around project-based service learning, that improving student learning through context, but adds nuance with a specific focus on technical tools. Another interesting result was that students reported key learning on the constraints of socio-technical systems and how that shapes the success of a solution. So another student wrote that the goal of using technology to save lives comes from a place of genuine hope, but the regulatory, technological, and political hurdles that emerge when trying to implement technology make it extremely difficult to implement. And so this really excited us because it highlighted and it was clear that fluency across dimensions of socio-technical systems like regulation and politics are necessary in this particular problem domain. Last, students identified limitations in traditional innovation approaches latent in project-based service learning work. One student says, I would have loved to have heard from people willing to share their stories about their experiences with disasters. Those are the people worth working with first. And that student was responding to the types of guest speakers and the technical experts that they were encouraged to engage with through the class. And so these findings follow contemporary critiques of human-centered design approaches and illustrate the broad requirements of socio-technical fluency. And so that brings us to our conclusions for this work. We learned that project-based service learning driven by design innovation curricula can be supported by a more proactive embrace of socio-technical complexity and technology as an asset rather than as an end in itself. And this opens up some opportunities for design educators to connect students with relevant expertise related with PBSL problem domains. Second, to elevate stakeholder voices traditionally left out of the design process. And last, to contextualize technology in problem domains as a design tool rather than an outcome. And so we hope you'll take a look at our manuscript in the Design 22 proceedings, and we'd be delighted to discuss our work further. We're grateful for the support that made this work possible. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vivek. I'm just pretending that you did that live. So well done, and a round of applause for me. It sounded very well rehearsed, so I appreciate that. So now we're moving on to Yasuyuki with his presentation on his work on an educational probe for developing online education and the associated case here. So Jelena and Yasuyuki, take it away. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Yasuyuki Hayama. I am a PhD candidate and researcher in design in Politecnico di Milano in Italy. Thank you very much for joining us today to share and discuss our research. The title is Educational Probe for Developing Online Education, a case of online problem-based learning in design education in India. So let's start. This is today's contents. I will have 4 contents following inland general structure. Our study focused on a research gap in between the practical challenges that higher educational institutions nowadays facing and the opportunity for developed online problem-based learning. More and more higher educational institutions in design and other practical disciplines encounter big challenges to develop and provide high-quality educational and learning contents. On the other hand, there appears new opportunity, namely online curriculum development. However, it is still rarely discussed how to develop online problem-based learning under the rapidly changing educational context by extant papers and scholars. Two goals were set for the research. First, this study explores how online PBL can have a potential impact on opening up new educational activities and experiences. Second, we investigate the effectiveness of a prototype approach to generate a new online PBL curriculum. We have applied this experimental research in the 2 years master course of design management in MIT Institute of Design in India. The faculty members were looking for an opportunity to install a new innovative curriculum of design management, which is focusing on design-driven innovation, DDI approach. There were big challenges to tackle on the new course developments. First, lack of know-how. It is not an easy task to develop new online courses from the scratch in general, and in our school as well. Second, lack of faculty members who has enough knowledge of content. Hence, to overcome those challenges, the authors applied a prototype approach, collaborating with teaching staff overseas who has a shared understanding of the concept of design-driven innovation. To achieve the two goals, a prototype approach was applied, and data were collected through action research approach accordingly. This is a prototype framework elaborated by authors. At the basic condition, it was designed for 3 days plus 1 day short online educational workshop. As a general timeline, lectures and workshops were installed every day in order to investigate both the content's effectiveness of design-driven innovation and problem-based learning approach as workshops. All the activities were completely planned and organized online under the condition of COVID-19 restriction. As teaching strategy, a real-world problem setting was planned. A new product development for an Indian food company was the selected challenge. Then, as a learning content, design-driven innovation approach was installed. The first result is about the learning experience itself. 3 aspects of the educational prototype were investigated and highly evaluated. As online education, 88% of students gave a high evaluation of experience. They appreciated high frequency of feedback during the workshop by the lecturers. As problem-based learning, a real-world setting was highly appreciated. More than 60% of students evaluated the PBL experience. As a new content of DDI, 100% of students felt the relevance with the master course. As a conclusion, through the prototype approach, the general idea of the new online course was confirmed as valuable and meaningful to be developed. Second result is about further future expectation for educational development. As an online format, the online experience itself was highly evaluated. However, a hybrid online and offline experiences will be appreciated. As a problem-based learning, longer duration of the course will be more preferable. 3 days were too short to complete all the challenging real-world problems. In relation with content of DDI, related learning contents were suggested. Brand strategy and entrepreneurship were examples that were suggested by students. Consequently, future expectations of educational development were effectively collected and as a real voice by participants. We believe that the paper has 3 main contributions. First, the effectiveness of potential of online PBL have been elaborated, especially under the rapidly changing conditions after the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, a prototype approach has been certified as an effective development tool to educational development. Finally, the concept of educational probe has been briefly proposed. At the end of the presentation, I would like to sum up educational implications for practitioners. The message is, educational probe as a prototype approach to develop a new educational curriculum has a fundamental potential in rapid changing educational contexts. We hope that scholars in multiple disciplines will engage in research and practice to establish academic inquiries and knowledge of educational development. Thank you for your listening to the end, and I hope to have your comments and feedback for the further discussion.
Thank you so much, Yasuyuki, for your presentation. Lots of good stuff in there. So I think many useful framings that we can also then later pick on in the discussion. So next up now is Frederike from the Ruhr-University in Bochum, talking to us about adaptive e-learning for the engineering design education. And Frederike, the floor is all yours.
Hello, thank you for your interest in my presentation. My name is Frederike Kossack, and I'd like to present you our paper about adaptive e-learning for the engineering design education at Ruhr-University Bochum, Germany. First-year engineering design education courses are often attended by a large number of students. Most of these students have differing levels of knowledge and experience caused by their various secondary education backgrounds, vocational trainings, or completed pre-engineering courses. The most widely used course format in the design engineering in Germany are teacher-centered lectures. So all students are taught the same content in the same pace, even though they start at different levels of knowledge and competence. Additionally, due to the high number of participants, there is almost no interaction between the teachers and the students. Furthermore, students in large groups are inhibited to ask questions. So the questions or problems of different students to understand the content are not taken enough into consideration. Individual support to compensate the existing heterogeneity would require large tutor capacities. Supplementary learning material has been shown to be quite useful for the heterogeneous student groups. However, it is difficult for students to identify suitable material appropriate to their individual background and context and to review available content on their own, especially during the transition from high school to college in the first-year courses. E-learning in general is efficient for large groups of students as it creates a reduced workload for the tutor. One approach to deliver personalized learning materials to students without creating immense workload for tutors and teachers is the concept of adaptive e-learning. This can involve both individual and personal needs and preferences. It is described as an interactive system which adapts and personalizes interaction between the system and the user in the presented learning content. In general, an adaptive e-learning environment has different stages. An initial classification. This classification can be carried out based on different criteria like preferred learning style, age, or in the presented case, existing knowledge and skills. The presentation of learning content. Based on the initial assessment in step 1, learners get learning content presented. Ongoing measurements. The ongoing measurement can be continuous with capturing students' behavior or intermittently with periodic knowledge tests. These steps are described as a loop of diagnosis and support. The approach for the development of an adaptive e-learning environment is based on constructive alignment. This outcome-based approach assigns teaching and assessment to intended learning outcomes and is suitable for several levels of study programs, for example, single lectures, whole modules, or faculty profiles. The intended learning outcomes are central in the system and explain what students are expected to achieve with which level of understanding and performance. The assessment task reveals whether a student reached the criteria described by the learning outcomes. Example for assessment tasks next to exams are presentations or portfolios. Teaching and learning activities describe the work students need to do for achieving the intended learning outcomes. These teaching and learning activities include independent learning by themselves, for example, with exercises or in groups on project, just like introductions by a teacher, for example, in lectures. The current basic engineering design education course at Ruhr-University has about 400 participants and includes technical drawing, dimensioning, and methodical product development. The intended learning outcomes of the whole module are specified in the module description. Furthermore, there are intended learning outcomes for single units or lectures. The course assessment task is a written exam at the end of the course. Besides traditional teacher-centered lectures and exercises with consulting hours, a lot of material for self-studying, for example, small online textbooks or videos, are provided in the online learning management system Moodle. Self-studying is recognized with about 60% of the overall course time expense. For the winter semester 22-23, an adaptive e-learning environment will be developed for this course. Adaptive e-learning is expected to present students individual needed learning material in their self-study time instead of only literature lists or examples in the Moodle course. So it will be an additional offer for the students next to the lectures and exercises with consulting hours. Students will evaluate their individual learning outcomes by taking small diagnosis tests at home. Based on the results of these regular tests, the students will receive individual recommendation for different learning contents for their self-study time at home. As constructive alignment is suitable for the development of several levels of the study program, the development of the adaptive e-learning environment for the course is defined in the following main steps. The first step is the refinement of the general intended learning outcomes as described in the module description into refined intended learning outcomes for the adaptive e-learning environment. Thereby, these refined intended learning outcomes must be automatically testable with the options offered by the learning management system Moodle. Detailed consideration of all learning outcomes of the individual learning units and their clustering into topics or application examples makes weekly testing appropriate. The second step is the creation of tasks for identifying existing skills and knowledge as weekly formative assessment. The aim of the task is not only to determine the degree of achievement of the learning outcome, but also to identify existing deficits in order to provide appropriate support. The technical implementation in Moodle will be accomplished with closed question types, for example, multiple or single choice, in the function test, and a feedback for the chosen answer. Thereby, the distractors will be chosen carefully to indicate a specific deficit of a skill needed to reach the intended learning outcome. A continuous measurement will be included by the integration of tasks from former weeks. Furthermore, content that is not explicitly addressed but is required for further intended learning outcomes is examined, for example, geometric area calculation. The third step is the assignment of available learning materials like book chapters or worksheets to learning levels diagnosed with the test results for providing individual support to reach the intended learning outcomes. These learning materials will be presented as links in the feedback of the single questions and also the whole test. All materials for the learning activities will be available in the course and are visible for all students. The adaptive e-learning environment only suggests them. The suitability of the didactic concept of adaptive e-learning environments for the field of basic engineering design is discussed, and an approach for applying it in an existing course concept is presented. We look forward to the evaluation in winter semester 22-23. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I'm looking forward to your questions and an interesting discussion.
Thank you, Frederike. That was very well structured and lots of good content in here. And already have a million questions about the ongoing measurement and the details of the real-time customization. So I'm looking forward to our discussion. Our next talk is by Urvi. And I just see we have a little bit of technical issues. Urvi, you need to press the magic blue button again so that we can approve you for joining the panel. And while we're doing that, so we're now starting Urvi's presentation on overcoming pedagogical challenges in product design education during the pandemic. All right, Urvi, back just in time. Perfect. Here we go. Yeah.
We all know that we were hit by the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Even the educational sector was impacted and physical classrooms had to be transitioned to virtual classrooms. Here, we have created a comparative analysis of learning product design pre- and post-pandemic. This work was done by me, Urvi Thakker, a design management student at SCAD and a former student and teaching assistant at Atlas Skilltech University, with my co-author, Mr. Shamit Shrivastav, the program director of the product design department. I will first start off with the background of design education and how we plan our transition from physical to virtual. Then I will go into details of the case study. And finally, I'll wrap up with noting the key conclusions of the study. Design as an educational discipline blends an individual's creativity with theoretical knowledge and practical skills. All the disciplines of design follow a studio-based approach, a model that is highly dependent on the physical environment. This approach supports interaction, active learning, and social engagement. The pandemic had unfortunately disconnected the students from this learning environment. Therefore, it had become necessary to leverage the digital technology to help achieve the learning outcomes. The purpose of documenting this case study is twofold. Like any other case study, it serves as a repertoire of the best practices of design institutes to explore new ways of delivering academic content effectively in a digital classroom. And secondly, it lists examples of the desired outcomes produced by students despite the constraints caused by the pandemic. Our study is focused on design studios that are the foundation of a product design curriculum. In a design studio, using a design process is key. A lot of elements in the process require hands-on work in a physical design studio, and so they become difficult to be incorporated in a virtual design studio. As Al-Nusrat mentions, the learning by doing approach needs to be considered for the online learning model. The figure shows the comparison between the elements of a physical design studio and a virtual design studio. Unlike physical design studio that includes a studio environment, materials, and tools, the working environment of a virtual design studio is like any other online class. Due to lack of access to physical spaces, experiments can be hard to follow and learning by doing can be missed. Learning experiences are also affected by administrative issues, social interaction, limited access to resources, and technical difficulties. So, how can we bridge the gap and meet learning objectives of a design studio in a virtual setting? To bridge the gap, planning of virtual learning was at multiple levels: school, program, and course. Additionally, we looked at learning through different lenses such as pedagogy, course planning and delivery, learning resources, course content, and learning outcomes. The main objective of executing Virtual Design Studio in a product design department was to have minimum deviations with respect to a physical design studio. The university ensured that the core elements of Design Studio were retained in the Virtual Design Studio and new elements such as the teaching assistant and project briefs built around materials at home were added. Therefore, learning outcomes were redefined, course content was modified, and new learning resources were evaluated. Now, let's deep dive into each of these through the design process of discover, develop, and deliver. In the discover phase, user research plays a crucial role to identify the problem. Considering the limitations of virtual contextual research, the educators confined project briefs favorable to situations, introduced online interviewing practices, and encouraged teamwork to analyze input from diverse team members. Over time, students were able to recruit more participants who felt more comfortable sharing information online. Generating ideas for design solutions is an important step. Ideas generated are visualized through two courses: process drawing and visualization, and computer-aided industrial design. For these courses, educators balance synchronous and asynchronous activities to achieve learning effectiveness as that of physical design studio. In the deliver stage, students had to create mock-ups and prototypes to demonstrate and test the final product. No access to workshops became a major limitation in the virtual design studio. To not stop students from being creative in prototyping with innovative materials, teachers facilitated material exploration in class that guided students to exploit materials available at their disposal. Similarly, students understood the principle of working and developed prototypes of simple electronic objects at home. Evaluation of learning outcomes done by faculties was considered as a measure for the study. Towards the end of the semester, course faculty scored the student performance for each student on 100. The mean scores for all courses, except for computer-aided industrial design, reflected 10 to 18% improvement in student performance in an online context. The increase in the mean scores can be attributed to student performance, evaluation criteria, and the new rubric used for grading. The study primarily compares the pre and the post-pandemic scenarios in a design studio based on the actions taken by the university and the outcomes produced by the students. Despite the limitations, the results demonstrate that all courses achieved the intended learning objective to a large extent. Although the online medium generated many firsts, it also lagged in some critical areas. Access to physical workshop, peer-to-peer interaction, and socialization in campus were deeply missed by the students. The scope of the study can be extended to understand how the new teaching environment has treated the faculties. This study can also be extended to other programs in the design school to achieve an extensive understanding of design education in the pandemic times. To conclude, the pandemic challenged the physical nature of studio model that needed to be critically addressed at multiple levels. To address this, there was a high degree of agility for quick adaptability, and continuous improvement in virtual learning experience helped get close to the desired state. While some pedagogical challenges are not completely addressed in the virtual mode, they can be further elevated. Lastly, the new format of learning has demonstrated good indicators of it being mainstream or a hybrid approach post-pandemic. Thank you.
All right, thank you. What I say, you've knocked it out of the park. I can't believe this was your first conference presentation. I've seen lots of presentations by senior faculty who do not reach that level of quality, so thank you for that. And I also have to say, don't be negative about the other presentations, but of these novel materials for prototyping, and then showing us pictures of carved cucumber. That also takes the prize for my favorite moment in today's presentation. So thank you for that, and looking forward to coming back to your presentation in the discussion. Up next, we have Sasha and Marie, and already concluding the presentation part of today's session about creating a multidisciplinary collaboration service experience in design education. So Sasha and Marie, the floor's all yours now. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Sasha Joseph Matthews, and I'll be presenting today on creating a multidisciplinary collaboration service learning experience in design education. This study was done in conjunction with Professors Lee and Kreidler. So our study chronicles a project that is a multidisciplinary service learning project, and we worked on these projects in conjunction with a global social entrepreneur. We worked with many global social entrepreneurs over a 3-year period, and the project was essentially a collaboration between an advanced international marketing class and an advanced graphic design class. The students created a full marketing plan over a semester-long project and had a minimum of 3 design deliverables for their clients. Whilst we were working on this project, when we decided we wanted to work on this project, our first thought was that we had to base this on an actual experiential learning model. And so we chose COLBS, and COLBS talks about concrete experiences, students going out and doing things, then coming back and reflecting on what it is they did, and then us facilitating kind of a learning exercise where we take things that they would have experienced and create a learning opportunity, and then students go back out in the field to actively experiment once again. So we had a number of goals for this project over the time. We wanted to implement a multidisciplinary collaborative project that mirrored real-world interaction. So something similar to what would happen in a advertising, in the advertising world, an advertising agency, or a multidisciplinary design team for a project or a service organization. And we wanted to ensure that we improve from year to year, that each year students would learn from both their clients and from each other, as well as from the professor, and we would improve. And then finally, we wanted something that we can use as kind of a practical model roadmap for professors moving forward, if professors wanted to do something similar. Because in our school, we have an experiential learning element in all of our concentrations. So the design process roadmap was going to be very, very important. And this has three essential areas: pre and intro at the beginning of the semester, meat and potatoes during the middle, and then at the end. So prior to meeting, we would talk, the design professors and myself would talk about what clients. We have a pool of international social entrepreneur clients that we work with. We would pick the clients. We would set up the semester because we had to make sure that we had a collaborative time. So we were meeting at the same times so that we can meet with the students joint together, and then we could also have teams meet on their own. So that was important to coordinate. We also wanted to introduce the students to the project and allow them to pick, because we have found when students pick their project, it's a lot more successful. We wanted to give students the time to do the research and to kind of establish and meet with their clients and get to know their clients. Then during the meat and potatoes part, students would figure out what are the key problems that they have to deal with. They would create problem statements, and then they would create objectives coming out of that, generate sketches and comprehensive designs. And then they would also, excuse me, develop copy. In the last part of the semester, they would do their critiques, their presentations, and their design deliverables would be given to the clients. So this is an example of one of the projects, My Breast Kept Secret, where we worked with a client, Ms. Prophet, out of Trinidad and Tobago, and she created a book that talked about normalizing breast through humorous stories. The students did everything. We're pretty proud of them on this one. They did book illustrations, cover book layout, they did an ebook. Then they also had to work on the designs to promote the particular book. So websites, poster, Instagram posts, etc. And they even developed a card game in the help of promotion. Each year that we did this, we wanted to make sure that the students saw some improvement and that we took student feedback into consideration as we moved along and moved from semester to semester and year to year. So at the end of the first year and at the end of the second and the end of the third, we would always do a student survey where we would ask the students, and we had really high participation rates, something like 90-something%. And the feedback we got was that 95% of students felt that this was a good collaboration for them between design and marketing. They also felt this was really useful when they were applying for jobs, and they thought it would be really useful when they were actually working in these jobs. Some of the changes that we made coming out of that feedback was that we divided the project into smaller bites. So not just one big project at the end of the semester, but small deliverables, both marketing and design deliverables that we would give them feedback on. And then in the third year, we also decided that in order to increase collaboration and communication, we would have a design lead and we would have a marketing lead, and we would have mandatory times for meetings so that everyone knew upfront when they would be meeting. But we wanted to make sure that this wasn't just our opinion and the students' opinion. Once we wanted to write the study, we wanted to be ensured that we had an independent voice evaluating the project. So we got 2 independent professors to grade the project designs, and we found that overall, there was an increase and an improvement in grades between the first year and the third year. We found it was statistically significant improvement in grades, not between year 2 and year 3, but certainly between year 1 and year 3. And then we wanted to be sure that we were evaluating learning outcomes. And so we looked at the 4 C's, which is a standard in business. Learning outcomes of communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. And the students absolutely felt that the communication had improved. They felt that they were collaborating effectively. We as professors, through the grading process, recognized that critical thinking was done. And then the independent professor also spoke to creativity. So we were pretty happy with the results, because we felt that the value of this was to achieve what we were looking to do, which was mirror real world experiences, give a valuable learning experience for the students, move from the abstract theory to the practical implementation, and then give our students portfolio pieces that would be really valuable to them. So we think overall, this was a really successful project, and we look forward to getting your feedback in our online discussions.
Thank you very much, Sasha and Marie, for this really interesting presentation. And 95% student happiness, that are almost North Korean levels of satisfaction, I have to say. So very, very well done. All right, so that concludes the presentation part. Jelena, if I could kindly ask you to stop sharing the screen, and then we'll have the presenters a little bit bigger here. We have some questions in the chat. I have a long list of questions here, so I I think we'll have plenty of things to do until 3:30. I don't believe there's an easy way for the participants to ask their questions themselves. Or am I wrong here, Jelena? The people in the sessions can't talk, right?
Yeah, if we give them permission to talk, they can.
Oh, okay.
They just have to press the blue button.
All right, let's not mess this up unnecessarily. So Beate and friends that ask questions afterwards, if you don't mind, I will paraphrase your questions here. So we're starting with a question here towards Vivek, and I think it's an interesting question that also more generally applies to a lot of the other presentations that we've heard today. So how do you, as you look at the success of your interventions in your learnings, how do you isolate the effects from the different parts that you're experimenting with? So Beate specifically asks about the effects of changes to the project-based learning versus changes to the content itself. And I would add from the framework that Yasuyuki introduced in his talk to the problem-based learning and the design methods, also the format of delivery from online, real life, and hybrid. So Vivek, if you would take a stab at that question, and then I'll open it up to the other presenters as well to contribute their thoughts here. Vivek, please.
Yes, thank you, Beate, for that question. So I have to admit, we were not able to isolate the effect of project-based learning, and project-based learning was really integral to the construction of the course from the outset. I would love to have the opportunity to do a controlled study where we have one version of this class that is acontextual and not project-oriented, and we keep the kind of current structure to examine the results. One of the challenges with that, and I would draw on a framework that we heard from the last talk from Sasha around active experimentation in the Kolb learning model. And the active experimentation component of this class was really grounded in project-based learning. And so, right now, the way we've structured the course doesn't really afford us to execute it without it. And so I think one of the way we hope to position our findings is around how did project-based service learning afford certain outcomes or certain behaviors, and we aren't able to make the argument that that was more effective or unique to the use of project-based service learning, but to try to draw through the reflections some causal links that the students propose themselves. So I'll be happy to talk more about that as a starting point.
All right, thank you, Vivek. Sasha's dropped out of the call. I'll hope that Jean-Marie will be able to. Oh no, Marie is still here. Can you just?
Yes, I'm here.
For Sasha? And thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, she has problems with internet. Do you want me to elaborate on our project, or?
Yeah. Would you care to comment on the question of how you guys are thinking about sort of isolating the effects of different interventions that you make in your learning, and how to understand the impact that the different aspects have on the overall outcome?
Mm-hmm. So we have tried to look at. So we have used the independent evaluators, and they did not know what year the projects were coming from, because we, as professors, we saw an improvement, but we did not know how much of it was, just possibly based on different groups of students. So we actually did a statistical analysis looking at their GPAs, and we found there was not a statistical difference between their GPAs. So we concluded that we could we could use the three groups, and they were about the same level of they had about the same level experience, and then the independent professors, not knowing what year the project came from, really helped evaluate the success of the project. So it was more than just students saying, "Yay, it's my amazing project. We think it will be useful," but it was independently verified.
Yeah, I think, Marie, that gets us into a really interesting and related conversation here. Of course, part of the question of how do we quantify the impact that different changes or different interventions have that we make in our learning environments, and also the question of how do we measure that stuff. Yeah? And I'm thinking here, Yasuyuki and Urvi, as well as Frederike, you all, and maybe Yasuyuki, we can start with you, because you were also talking about the probing and the prototyping, which I think is really interesting in the context of sort of designing these learning experiences. Because a lot of the time we as educators ignore our own good advice, and we do some monolithic design, and then we say, oh, that's a great class, and now let's just go and execute it well, and everything's going to be great. So I really appreciate your perspective on, it actually has to be more of an ongoing learning process with iterative refinement. So would you care to comment on what your learnings were around the probing, the prototyping, and how you then actually take sort of actionable insights out of that? Linking back to what we just discussed of what part of the course are we actually trying to change and improve here?
Okay. Hello. Thank you for your comments. And so as I presented, our experiment is only limited within 3 days, really short prototype course. So we didn't evaluate the outcome of the students, because it's not a real educational courses, normal educational courses. But instead, we tried this new prototypical course together with students. So the purpose of this experiment is to discover something insightful in order to develop the new curriculum. So this was our purpose in our first step. And from our experiment, that one good thing is that using the prototype approach, we creating really small size educational probe, we could try conceptual model and the new learning experiences, if it could be interesting for students, and both for teachers as well. And thanks to the context of innovation management course in that design discipline, we could check the new contents can have a good impact on the existent learning course as well.
So I want to push you a little bit more on that, because I think it's really interesting what you're saying. But it's easy to say, oh, we do a bit of probing and we do a bit of prototyping, and then we see what works and what doesn't, and we adjust it. How exactly are you thinking about that? Because the more often you measure, let's say, the more often you measure sort of a learning outcome, the harder it gets to actually observe something meaningful. So do you rely on students' perception of usefulness and then say, oh, Sasha gets 95% approval rating, we want that too, yeah? Or how do you think about evaluating these quick iterations?
Yes, in our case, we got a direct feedback from students using survey format, Google survey, and so we prepared the several questionnaires, and we get the feedback, and we calculated the answer from scaling from 1st to 5, grade scale, and we also calculated the satisfaction level among all the students, and luckily that we could get the high level of satisfaction, like almost I forgot the total clear number, but almost 80% students were satisfied on the experiment and experience, and also the content itself, the design-driven innovation. So we try to ask several dimensions, like online experience and the content itself, in this case, design-driven innovation, and this context. So in that way, we try to ask direct feedback from the students, using the questionnaires.
All right, thank you, Yasuyuki. Urvi, I'm interested in your perspective here, because you also redesigned the course, and there was sort of a benchmark there of an existing course taught in a physical surrounding that you now decided to move to an online format. How did you guys think about both evaluating sort of the overall performance of the class, as well as you very nicely walked us through the different aspects of the class? Did you have a way of specifically sort of probing and exploring what the impact of these different aspects was? Or just how did you think about success of the class, and then what the different parts contributed to that?
Yeah, so I think for me, I was a student. I was like a physical student for 4 years. I studied product design at the same university. And after graduating, I was a teaching assistant for 6 months, and that was virtual. So I knew what happened in the physical environment. So I could compare like how different the virtual environment is. And I think as a teaching assistant, my role was also to plan, monitor, and support the delivery of the whole virtual learning experience. And I think like mainly what I would do was sit in different classes and see what's going on in the class, and I would actually document like every little thing that's changed. And that's what led to the paper also, actually. So I think doing that, and as well as I think talking to students every now and then, because I think I was like a mediator. Some of the juniors knew me, so that's how I would like evaluate and understand, because they would give me like honest perspectives on what they think about the class. So I mean, I was like a mediator, and that was like translated to the faculties, and then we constantly iterated the whole course. But I think other than that, we also had like a survey passed down to students, and to see what they feel about the whole virtual design experience. And I think that also sort of helped us improve our course over 5 weeks. So it was a 10-week course, so that helped us, yeah.
Did you also talk about rely on faculty evaluation of the course outcome, or you turn that around?
Your voice is cracking, actually. I don't know if others can.
I'll try again. Did you talk about both doing? Still not?
No.
Am I through for the other folks? Is it my problem, or is it what we?
Could you please refresh the page once again? It helped.
All right. How is this?
Yeah, it's better.
Smiling faces. Okay, I apologize for my computer. I just had this quick follow-up question, because Sasha talked about using both student perceptions and evaluations and combine that with a faculty perspective. Did you guys also do that?
I think faculty perspective was always involved from the start, because they were the ones developing the course. But obviously, they would be really open to what the feedback came from students. So I think in that way it was involved, but I don't think I've touched a lot into the details of what the faculties faced throughout the pandemic and how they went through it.
All right, thank you. Frederike, I'm interested in your perception here, Lars. I know the question is coming from Beate, so we'll see if we can help her internally here a little. But in your talk, you're very much focused on, we have a well-structured system with well-defined learning objectives, and then we have well-defined quizzes and tests that allow us to, at a quite granular level, figure out what the students' needs are and how we can better support them through sort of this modularized learning material that we're that we're presenting. How are you thinking about evaluating the effectiveness of that system? Are you thinking about continuing sort of these objective measures? Are you in conversations with the students and the faculty? How does that component look?
First, we have already dates of a control group. So we ask a year of students who had not an adaptive e-learning, who just had the normal lectures and some extra material for the self-study time. And we collect the data to see if there is a significant correlation between their technical levels before starting the course and their graduation after 1 year. So, and we hope with using this adaptive e-learning, this will be less than it was before.
All right, I like that you have stuff that you can measure and then say better or worse at
we hope. Of course, every year is different. Maybe the year we took the data from was synchron online digital lectures. So, and the next one will hopefully be in presence. Of course, there are some effects we can't take into consideration, but as we have a group of about 300 students, we hope we get some nice results.
My rule is if evaluations go up, it's because of something that I did, and if evaluations go down, it's because of something that the department did. So, and I'm sticking with that method. All right, thank you. And also, again, thank you, Beate, for the question. I think we had a good round of discussion here. So I want to, Stanko, you had a question here for Vivek on the student learning process from the stakeholders and end users, because I think what's also a common thread here is that there is a strong experiential component here, because we all, in one word or another, talk about project-based learning and experiential learning. So I'd like I'm inviting all of you, and Vivek, you're welcome to start again, to talk a little bit about how you're facilitating or how you're evolving the way that you engage with the stakeholders. So maybe a little bit more broadly than Stanko has asked here, how do you facilitate that interaction, including the sort of discovery of the original stakeholders? And I'm also thinking here about comments that were made a few times, sort of this, how do we capture the voice of left out stakeholders, or stakeholders that we traditionally did not think about? I think, Vivek, that was you, and I also felt, Sasha, that was also a big topic in your work, that we develop this systemic perspective, not just on the technical side, but also regarding the stakeholder landscape. So maybe we'll do the rounds again here. Vivek, would you like to start? How do you think about that, and how are you evolving that in your teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question, Stanko. So I think that, following a design thinking, lean startup, kind of customer-centered, user-centered design process, I think, which many of us are drawing on in this panel and in this conference more generally, engaging with stakeholders is critical. And I think one, to directly answer your question, Stanko, because this is such a niche topic area, we typically worked with project sponsors, or before there were project sponsors, we basically created a list of folks who were willing to speak with students, the stakeholder list that would at least get the students started on the process of having conversations. Now, as we transition to remote learning, we had a lot of concerns about this, mainly because really believed in the spirit of active experimentation, like engaging in person, students putting themselves in certain environments or contexts that could really afford unique insight towards the project. And so that obviously was not going to be possible with constraints of remote learning. And so that was certainly a loss. But I think one interesting upside is that when we found when dealing with such kind of niche topics where there are maybe dozens of folks throughout the country or throughout the state who have expertise that these individuals the students wanted to engage with, remote learning really normalized the ability to have a Zoom call with someone 3,000 miles away and have a meaningful conversation in a way that wasn't possible before. And by the time we hit the second iteration of the class, which fully remote, that was a learned behavior both on the part of students being willing to reach out to stakeholders boldly, I would say, and for stakeholders to be willing to engage in those kinds of conversations. So there was definitely an upside, which I would love to codify or develop some best practices around that really enriched the types of insights that students were able to have. And then on that last point that you raised, Joseph, about who's left out, I think that there are definite risks and that came to light with the quote that one very astute student brought up, which is that and the subtext there is it's quite easy to reach people who are savvy on Zoom and savvy and having lots of Zoom meetings and a full calendar of Zoom meetings, to slot right in, but to connect with folks who may be less, less advantaged or less privileged in being able to access those resources, or it's just not as normalized a behavior, their voices get, even more left out than they might normally be from a design study. And I think that as instructors, we really want to empower our students to, engage with those voices in a really proactive way.
Thank you, Vivek. Really interesting. Sasha, I'd like to hear from you next, if that's okay, because I was really impressed with what I saw both in the paper and the presentation, that you're engaging a very wide stakeholder base here, and what struck me also, maybe as a stakeholder group that's not used to being involved in design type processes, and around very, I'm trying to avoid the word crazy here, interesting project ideas and topics. I can't. You must have so much fun in that course, yeah. But can you talk a little bit about that, because I think that brings a really interesting complexity to it. There must be a lot of sensitivities. There must be a lot of I don't want to say barriers, but introduction to the design process and sort of engagement with these stakeholders. And can you talk a little bit about how you think about that in the context of designing those courses?
Yeah, it's pretty unique because you have a situation where normally you're just designers and a client, right? But in this situation, we have designers, marketers, clients, community, and we wanted to make sure that, and professors, right? And we wanted to make sure that the project was authentic, that it really was a replication of what an advertising agency might be like. And I have a vast network of social entrepreneurs that I work with. And over the years, we've done this maybe 5, 6, 7 times now. We found that if students are really engaged in the project, they like the idea of the project, then they work harder, they do better work. And we really wanted to have a classroom experience where designers could be designers, marketers could be marketers, which is different from if we had all kinds of people taking a design course, right? And I think that experience is important for the students. And that is the number one thing that students say they value. They really value working with a designer and having a designer be evaluated by a design professor. They feel as if it's a real world experience. And then of course, we are very careful to pick projects students would enjoy. And actually Maria and I, in advance, a semester in advance, we find the entrepreneurs and we really sift through, because sometimes you get entrepreneurs that have great projects, but they are horrible with students and the students don't enjoy the experience. So we really spend a lot of time thinking about who is going to be the entrepreneur they work with. And that is very important to make sure that they enjoy. And sometimes students all the time students self-select, but sometimes they get into groups that you might not think. Like, we had a lot of guys say, I wanted to work with the breast health group, right? I thought that was interesting. I never had that experience before. And to your question of who's left out, well, we really try not to leave anybody out. We're really kind of sensitive to who is not performing at optimal level. And when we first started doing it, the designers weren't as involved. And so we changed it up and have marketing group leads, designer group leads. Designers are involved because obviously they are creating the designs, but they weren't as involved throughout the process with clients, etc. Marketers tend to take that lead. So now I think we've really kind of fine-tuned it so that we can get that 95% Korean level of satisfaction. I'm a marketer after all.
Very well, thank you. No, that's really interesting. Urvi, I'm interested in your perspective here, because in your talk you focus a lot on the physicality of the design studio and how you're now moving that into the virtual world and how you're trying to replicate that experience. What did you see around the stakeholder interactions, maybe both internal to the design studio as well as with the outside stakeholders, and how did you guys think about that as you move from an physical to an online experience? And what I'm fishing for here is also what is asking, one of the questions here in the chat, is there maybe something that we can learn here also now that we don't have to be online, but are there maybe some elements of the hybrid engagement that maybe allows us to reach more stakeholders, so different kinds of stakeholders, that we would have previously missed in or that are now easier to engage? What are your thoughts there?
So about the stakeholder, I think one of the important stakeholders that we also looked at was parents, because parents were still paying full fees for a virtual class. So how do we, make sure that parents are assured that the virtual learning is as effective? So what we would do is we would send out like weekly presentation sort of things, showing that, your second year student has done this in this week. So, I mean, it was overwhelming because it was a weekly thing, but at least it assured that, okay, there is progress that your student is making. So I think that is one of the things that we did. But other than that, for leveraging the virtual mode, we also had this symposium where we called in like international designers, including Don Norman. So I think that was really good, and that has never happened in college. So I think just leveraging what we had, this was one of the good things that happened in college. And I think just calling in people, like even alumni, to talk about their experience, I think this was something really new when it came to keeping students engaged. Coming to the question of how we can transition from now virtual to a post-pandemic scenario, I think students are really excited, especially like I spoke to my professor recently, and they are really excited to come back to campus and work in the studios. So whatever they had developed in their virtual classes, so all of that proof of concept is now being developed into physical prototypes, like a proper working prototype in the campus. And I think some students also feared like public speaking pre-COVID times. But I think in the virtual mode, they have also gained a lot of confidence speaking, because I think virtually it's easier to do so. And even in terms of like interviewing people, I think virtually if you do it, a lot of people are more comfortable giving more honest answers. So that was another thing. But I think, yeah, that would go transition very well into a physical environment, because now people are more confident in giving good presentations in on-campus reviews. Another thing, I think documentation of everything has become more streamlined because of the pandemic, because you had to do it in the pandemic, and now I think it's continuing, which is good. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Urvi. I think it's a really good observation there that sort of this virtual format just helps some people engage better with others, and not just then makes them good at engaging virtually, but also then allows them to develop a skill in sort of the offline world. Yeah, it's really interesting insight. I want to squeeze in one last question here, and I have to apologize to Stanko at some point for mutilating his questions here, but I'm going to do it to this one again. He was asking Frederike towards you around your approach to customizing the learning experience here. You talked to us about customizing or in a way, sort of prioritizing the content that already exists in a way, and that is there for all students, specifically to specific students' needs. Can you imagine customizations beyond that? For example, around the methods of delivery or type of engagement with the students? What's your thinking there? The argument being, I think that we in sort of online or hybrid learning environments, we may have more flexibility to play with different ways of engaging students in the design process.
What we see at the moment is every student has the same learning outcome, or should have the same learning outcome for a week. And with this approach, we want them to support them individually and not change the content of the lecture. The content of the lecture is the same for everybody, but it's just the way they reach the learning outcomes is individually presented for them.
Okay, Frederike, thank you for a short answer, because then we may even be able to finish on time here at 4 on dot. Thank you all so much. A big round of applause to our presenters here for really interesting papers, very well thought out presentations, and very insightful discussion here. So thank you for that. Big thank you to the audience, again, for the thoughtful questions that you've posed here. I'm sorry that we didn't get through all of them. But I think it was really interesting to hear the perspectives from different presenters here today on all of them. So thank you for that. The program here continues at 4:15, but this now formally concludes our session here. So thank you again, and I'll hope to see you later. Yeah, bye. And thank you, Jelena, last but not least, for keeping the technology working here in the background. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for the great session. Bye.